No, that's
No, no,
okay.
it's fine.
I've do I've donated plasma before, and it's not a fun process, but
30
it
seconds.
Yeah.
mostly just because it takes a long time. Whereas a blood donation can get done in like 20 seconds, not 20 seconds. That's we have 20 seconds before we're on air. A blood donation can be 20 minutes. A plasma donation usually is like an hour and a half.
Oh my
Um,
God.
but
Wow.
you can do it a lot more often, I think. Anyway, really excited to have you on the show. This is going to be great.
10
We're going to start
seconds.
in 10 seconds, and
Yeah.
we'll let it rip.
5,
Amazing.
4,
Looking forward to it.
3, 2, 1. Matt?
Hey, everybody, and welcome to our third Simul Media Live of the week. My name is Matt Collins, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketing here at Simul Media. I hope all of you are doing well and are healthy and safe wherever you may be watching, whether you're on LinkedIn, you're on Periscope, you're on Zoom. We're so grateful that you take time out to watch these programs and to be with us and to hear from people that we've handpicked to join the show, who I think all have in common a perspective on how brands can proactively navigate the current environment. We've heard from Bob Leodis from the ANA. We heard earlier in the week from Gordon Burrell, from Brian Weiser of Group M. And our guest today is every bit up to the task, and we're going to get into this in just a moment. It occurs to me that at the onset of any kind of a shock to the economy, or in this case, the economy and the public health, there is a very understandable inclination for brands and agencies to just freeze. Because when you freeze, as I like to say, you can't step on something, you can't hurt yourself. And it's quite natural to take a pause and just reassess the new reality. And a lot of brands certainly have done that. Anyone following the trades and seeing what's happening with the changes in advertising spend, especially planned for the month of April, can see that a lot of brands froze. But then, as the new reality sets in and gets defined, there's a real opportunity for brands, as we've said many times in this program, to first and above all other things, find a way to be useful to your customers. And if there's nothing else that people take away from these programs, I hope it's that. Be useful to your customers. Now, to be useful to your customers requires a couple things that you got to get right, and these aren't easy. The first is you've got to figure out what is that useful thing that you're going to actually do that's authentic to who you are and the unique way in which you can help people. But the second part, which is what we're going to really talk about today, is how do you communicate that to your customers? How do you engage them and meet them where they are in their mind space, in their physical space, to give them that reassurance? Some part of that is a communication strategy, but some big part of it is an advertising strategy. And so I am so grateful to be joined today uh, by Meryl Draper. She is the founder and CEO of Quirk Creative, an award-winning agency that has built some terrific spots. Go to findyourquirk.com and you can see a loop of their work. And we're going to talk to Meryl all about how brands can meet the moment. And I'm also double excited, Meryl, to have you on because you are the first repeat guest on the show. Welcome back to Simul Media Live.
Oh, I love that.
Wonderful to have you. And I'll point out, obviously, folks are not seeing Meryl, and that's because Meryl is at a place where there may not be the most stable internet connection for video. So we're going to do audio and know that her advice is the most important thing here. So Meryl, you and I communicated before this a little bit, but first, how's everything going? How are you holding up, and how's Quirk holding up?
We are doing well considering. It's been a really interesting time for agencies, advertising, marketing, production agencies in particular, and we're kind of riding the wave along with our clients. But we're really, I think, fortunate in this time to have a small, agile, and really resourceful team. So I think one of the silver linings in all of this is we've been able to pivot quite quickly to a work from home setup and also pivot alongside our clients who are undergoing massive change in their advertising strategies and continue helping them in that regard. So I count ourselves as incredibly lucky, but it definitively is an unprecedented time for everyone, people and brands.
Spot on. And now actually I realize I am seeing you, which is great. But if we lose you, we know we'll keep your audio. But it's great to be able to see you. Meryl, let's get into the questions at hand. And these are all so valuable and so useful for any brand that's trying to figure out right now, how do they engage their customers? And I'll start with, in just as a first things principle, are there golden rules that you are prescribing to clients or just generally for brands that are trying to figure out their way through this?
I think there's one golden rule that pretty much applies to every single brand out there right now. And it's certainly the one that we've been trying to guide our clients in right now. And that rule is don't be opportunistic. I think it really forces brands to assess. And if you're a brand listening in and you haven't already done this, please do so immediately. Think about, do I really have a seat at the table here? Should I have a seat at the table here? Is my brand related to what's happening in the world in any way, shape, or form? Healthcare brands, finance brands definitively do have a seat at that table right now. They really are quite naturally linked to what's happening. And by the way, when I say seat at the table, I mean seat at the table for consumer attention. Versus, let's say you're an underwear brand. Is underwear related to the global pandemic? No, it has pretty much nothing to do with the pandemic. And so for those brands, there really is no need to go recut a TV spot that has to do with COVID and your underwear. We don't necessarily need to hear from underwear brands during COVID, speaking about COVID specifically. So that, I think, is the first golden rule, is figure out whether you authentically and organically fit into the landscape. And if you do, I love this word that you used in your opener, Matt, useful. Usefulness is really critical right now. If you deserve a seat at the table, if you have something genuine to say, think about your content and your message in terms of usefulness. Usefulness can mean knowledge building, education, really supporting your consumers with building up their knowledge, with regards to your space. Usefulness can also mean intentionally creating content and messages that have levity in this dark time, or intentionally entertaining content. A lot of brands that are more in like the distraction industries, at-home workout brands, language learning apps right now, anything that's keeping our mind off of kind of the horrors that are happening, really also are doing a great job in that space. So in sum, it's number one, determine whether you really deserve a seat at the table. And number two, if you do, make sure you're framing your content and your creative in a way that's going to be useful to your audience.
We might have lost our audio. Matt, you still there?
I think we may have lost Matt for just a second.
Yeah, let's see if he comes back. If not, I'm going to have to bring him back in.
Okay, I'm getting word that we might have to bring him back in. So
Yes,
we will just give him a second.
I'm going to create a new input just in case he doesn't come back.
Sure. And just for the people on the line, while we wait for Matt to rejoin us, when we talk about creating useful content, there's a little bit, obviously, of a conundrum right now just on the content creation side of things. As any brand or agency side person knows right now, have much complete standstill, which is a really interesting situation to be in. So if you relied on video shoots in the past, you're realizing that those are really on hold currently. So what avenues do brands have to create new content
Merle, still
during
talking?
social
I just sent you a
distancing?
new input. You froze. Still there, Merrill?
Matt, do we have you back?
Almost.
Okay.
There he is. Okay, let me bring him back in. It's going to take me just about a second to do that.
Cool.
If everybody can just hold the wire. There's Matt. Okay, let me bring his audio back first anyway, so we can at least hear Matt.
Can you hear me, Cliff?
Yes, we can hear you. You're back on, Matt.
Nice.
You can go back into the program. I'm very
All
sorry.
right, Merrill, I have to apologize. I'm apparently the one that has the problematic internet connection.
Well, I thought it would be me, but I'm glad it's you. And it's not me.
Hey, so when I dropped off, you were talking about the notion of being of usefulness, and you had very compellingly kind of drew the line about understanding brands on one side of the line who may not necessarily have really very much to offer right now. You mentioned the example of the underwear brand. And then there are those that have a lot to offer. Financial services is a big one right now. And you could argue that there are brands that are considered household staples, some of whom really have to think through their message. Like right now, if you're a toilet paper manufacturer, you may be laying low because any advertising you do only creates demand that you may be unable to fulfill. But if you're a cereal brand, um, if you're a brand of snack food, it seems to me that you're still a part of the equation. You're still in the household and still something that people are going to be reaching for every single day. I wonder, how do you think about brands that maybe aren't directly impacted by this or may not be the first brands that come to mind? Should they be at this point, if they've got creative that's already done, should they just keep running it? Should they tune it to just simply issue we're thinking of you kind of a message? Or is there some other way that they should they should sort of acknowledge the moment? And here again, I'm kind of going back to the example of the underwear brand. I mean, is it really as simple as from their a creative standpoint, is it just keep doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I think if you look at it from the lens of, again, am I directly related to what's happening? So cereal brands, toilet paper brands, healthcare, finance, anything that is part of the new normal, I think in a sound way can make the environment part of their messaging. For brands that are less directly related to what's happening, I think it goes back to this idea of not coming off as opportunistic. And
Right.
everyone is hurting right now. Every single consumer is hurting deeply right now. And the last thing that people who are hurting want is to be sold something, um, in a really direct fashion. And so it's actually a great opportunity for brands that are semi-related to the space to make small tweaks to their existing creative, not necessarily saying open with, COVID is happening, buy the cereal. I'm saying a small tweak, like fine tuning a script to have a little bit more empathy. Or one of the things we're doing right now with one of our clients is we're recutting a TV spot where we're taking out the exterior footage and we're bringing in a lot more of the interior indoor footage that we had shot to make it a little bit more contextually relevant to what our consumers are going through. So small tweaks like that, I think, can go a long way without necessarily shouting from the rooftops, hey, there's a pandemic and don't worry, your cereal brand is here for you. Smaller creative tweaks, I think, will go a lot further. And you should be making those tweaks. One of the pieces of advice I'll give our clients is if you have creative that doesn't quite fit the mold of the current reality, don't throw it away. Don't be too precious with it. Be making slight tweaks in voiceover script or end cards or recutting little bits and pieces of it to make it a little bit more contextually relevant.
So you mentioned the rework that you're doing to bring in more an interior view, which totally makes sense because that's now the world that we see a lot more than we did 3 weeks ago. Let's imagine a scenario where you are a brand that launched a commercial into a world that was 1 week pre-COVID-19 really entering the public consciousness.
Yeah.
What should you do now? What options do you have for making the kind of adjustment that you describe?
So number one is just assess your current spot within the context of COVID. So have someone who's not related to your brand watch it and give you an honest take on whether there's some problematic areas that you may not be seeing. Um, and then the good news, Matt, is it's relatively easy to take something like a video spot and make small adjustments, like I mentioned. So recutting a spot from existing footage really takes about 2 to 3 days, give or take, script writing. So you can continue the media buy that you have using the assets you've already paid for by making really small adjustments. I think in order of priority, what I would say is if you're assessing creative that's currently in market, number one, assess the narrative. Is it offensive to the current reality? If so, rewrite a new voiceover script and rework the footage. Second things I might look at is tweaking end cards or calls to action to be a little bit more contextually relevant. Maybe there's a new promotional code, or maybe you have a new link to drive users to that's providing more information. Small end card tweaks typically take around 24 hours max, so that's very easy to adjust. So again, don't be precious with the spots or the creative that you have in market, but be really rigorous in assessing those creatives in the current market and determining whether in their current shape they're fit for the current reality.
You know what I'm remembering, Meryl, from my own experience having been the executive producer client rep on site for a shoot. I remember times where the director would get and the producers would get shots that weren't necessarily in the storyboard, hadn't been approved, but they would see something on the ground and say, let's just try this, let's try this. And I would start looking at my watch or maybe feeling like I could go for another run at craft services and I would think to myself, why are we doing this? But actually, at a moment like this is when you really appreciate all the stuff you have on the cutting room floor, because all of those assets could be brought in and used to reconsider or perhaps reposition or nudge a spot to where it needs to be in the moment. And that all that stuff is gold. And so one of the things you just reminded me of is a real need to really trust the process and including back to the, when these commercials are produced in the first place, that in the hands of a good director and a good producer with a good creative team at their side, you're not only going to get the materials you need for the finished spots, you're going to get a lot of stuff that if for a moment, just like now, can come in so handy.
I love that example. And I think brands sometimes forget that just how much content they have. Because ultimately, what we deliver as agencies is typically like a 30-second or a 15-second or a 6-second spot. But those edits come from 10-hour, 12-hour shoot days. And there's all that
Yeah.
footage sitting in the cloud or in a hard drive somewhere. And that content, that raw footage is now, your best tool in the toolkit. It's pretty much your ready-made, brand-specific stock footage library. So I think that's one of the first things that brands should be doing right now as larger shoots are on pause is revisiting all the raw assets they've ever produced and starting to organize those into a library that potentially can turn into new content.
I'm joined this afternoon by Meryl Draper, the CEO and founder of Quirk Creative, an award-winning creative agency that makes some of the best TV commercials you're going to see. And we're talking about how brands can rise to meet the moment creatively with their advertising in a very new and turbulent climate. If you have a question for Meryl about your own brand or about possibly setting direction creatively, feel free to ask it in the LinkedIn, Periscope, or Zoom environments, and we will make sure we get those questions funneled to Meryl. Meryl, let's imagine that you were a brand that was perhaps in the middle of getting ready for a shoot. You were planning out the production. You had a plan that was all set and ready to go. What options are available now for making sure that some message gets produced? Should they be? I mean, is it really just sort of throw out everything that maybe was done before and start over, or should they be thinking about perhaps tweaking something that was already in the hopper? What do you advise?
So if you can imagine that the average kind of campaign creation timeline is about, 2 to 3 months, any given project, you can imagine the number of brands that were smack dab in the middle of creating new spots and developing new campaigns when, the pandemic started hitting the United States. And that certainly has happened to some of the clients and brands that we work with, where there was one brand where we were 3 days out from their biggest shoot of the year, brand new campaign for a brand new product. And we had to stop the shoot because it just wasn't safe anymore to get crew together. Um, and that's the world we're in right now for at least the next couple of months, is larger shoots that require tons of crew, and tons of equipment are just on pause. It doesn't mean that content creation has to be on pause. And I would actually argue that brands should be creating content during this time because they're going to want to be top of mind, post pandemic. So there's several opportunities for brand new content creation. The first is stock footage. So really leveraging ready-made royalty-free assets. And I think the Facebook ad that just came out, which leveraged stock footage and also user-generated content, is a great example of a powerful ad that can just use some pretty rudimentary creative tools. The second is user-generated content style campaigns. We actually just completed a shoot with the same beauty brand I was talking about earlier, where we shipped out the latest grade iPhones and also lighting equipment to influencer and talents' houses, and patched in our director and just did a remote shoot with them. The end result of that is something that feels really authentic. It's much more testimonial style. And it's very relevant given the current reality that we're all living in. And then the third is animation. So the best thing about animation is that it requires no crew or equipment or shoot days. We actually just helped get a refresh, brand new TV spot for a language translation app, out the door from start to finish in about 7 business days. That was purely animated. So huge advantage for animated content right now, that again is a lot more cost effective and that can be really edited and produced in a timely fashion. So if you're thinking about content creation and you think all hope is lost because there's no big shoots, just know that there are avenues to create content. And a lot of these, by the way, you can do in-house as a brand. If you have great influencer relationships, you can coordinate with them. Nothing's stopping you to get content from them directly.
That's amazing. And I can't help but think about the impact this has had in terms of managing your company, Merrill Draper, and thinking about Quirk. One, of course, the advantages of animation is that I presume you can task animators from working from wherever they are, and maybe some of them already were working in a largely home-based environment, as long as they have a workstation that's got the processing power to pull it off. Animation can be done without, really, to your point, without bringing large groups of people together. So I'm guessing that Quirk has pivoted here to enable this kind of work to happen in a relatively unimpeded way. Is that right?
That is right. We're super lucky to have a great team of animators and designers and illustrators on our team already. It just means that we're focusing more on animated assets now, and their plates are a little bit more full with end-to-end animated spots than previous, where it was more of like having live action spots with spots of animation throughout. So luckily, we have those resources in-house, and we've been able to pivot quite seamlessly But this is the new reality for content creation for, I would say, the next couple of months. Is it's going to be a lot more UGC, a lot more stocked-based assets or previous footage-based assets, and a lot more animated assets that are coming out.
One more question for me, Meryl, and the questions are piling up here from our audience, which is great. Thank you so much, audience, for chiming in with your questions. Keep them coming, and we will get them to Meryl. Last one for me, Meryl, and you alluded to it a bit earlier. Let's think now about what will happen, and is that we will get through the other side of this. None of us knows exactly when that will be or what it will look like, but what should brands start doing now to prepare for that new reality, especially when it comes to refining their message and making sure their brand is putting its best foot forward?
Yeah, what an interesting question to grapple with. It almost feels a little bit sacrilegious in a way to think about a post-COVID world, because we're all in this reality right now, and there's so much confusion about when are things going to get back to normal? When is it going to end? But I do think it's imperative that brands start thinking about what happens when we are on the other side of this, whenever that happens. My prediction is that it is going to be a performance-driven world more than ever. In the aftermath of COVID. We've already been seeing this trend in marketing across the board, certainly with the emergence of brand response ads, where marketers are requesting spots that both sustain the brand in the long term but have a performance ROI. I think we're just going to continue to see that post COVID, where brands are, they're hurting and they're going to need to see a bottom line. And more than ever, every marketing dollar they spend from their slashed budgets, there's going to be an expectation of getting a return on that spend. So I anticipate a lot more performance assets, ROI driving creatives and campaigns in the aftermath of COVID.
So does that mean then, if you're a brand, and you are starting to do the right thing? By the way, I agree with you about planning for coming out of this, because while none of us can know exactly the timing of it, you're so much better off having a plan and changing the plan later than not having a plan at all and then becoming reactive. Are you recommending to brands that they think about embracing a creative and media strategy that, as we've talked about before, Meryl, doesn't require a reduction of impact when it comes to brand, but does start to add elements that can lead to better performance?
Certainly. I think performance is going to matter more than ever when performance becomes a reality again. The minute that consumer spending shifts, brands are going to be vying for that attention and vying for that business. So I just think there's going to be a huge pressure from marketing teams internally to justify spend and see an ROI on that spend. Now, to your point, Matt, that doesn't mean it has to come at the sacrifice of brand. I would actually argue that right now, when consumer spend is down, when performance is a little bit of a pipe dream, this is actually a great time for brands to do brand building, especially the ones that are actually able to walk the talk, that have serious CSR programs in place, that are giving back to their consumers, that again have something to say and a seat at the table, and are keeping their consumers informed. These are actually some great moments right now to build a brand without expectation of sales or performance, and save that for later. Focus on the brand now and start weaving in performance, when we start seeing that we're on the other side of the pandemic.
I could not agree with you more on that. I think you're spot on. The value now of coming to the market with the right kind of message. It gets back to the thing we talked about earlier about being useful. However, whatever that means for your brand, now is the time to do that. And there are case studies galore to be read out there about brands that made key decisions during other times of crisis, whether you want to go back to the Great Depression in the 1930s, or to war times, to the oil embargo, to the Gulf War, to 9/11, to the Great Recession of 2008. each one of these moments, as I've said many times on the show over the last couple of weeks, we faced conditions that made us all think, wow, we've never seen anything like this before. And that's true. But there are other things that are consistent from crisis to crisis. And one of those things that seems to be consistent is that brands that rise to meet the moment, that take a posture of being genuinely authentically helpful. You mentioned corporate social responsibility, and it doesn't necessarily have to be to fit into a CSR program. It could just be a moment where a brand says, you know what, we've got something else that we can do that will be genuinely helpful to customers. You look at the auto manufacturers who are giving interest breaks on loans that they've extended, or are offering interest-free loans for longer term periods, or are offering loan forgiveness in the event that a customer is displaced by or affected by unemployment. Those things, they don't have to be wrapped in a social responsibility blanket or program in order to be effective. They just are useful, and brands that are useful at this time and let their customers know significantly outperform the brands that simply just say, well, we're just going to wait it out. We're going to hunker down and wait it out. Not only during the crisis itself, but also getting to the other side of it. And that's what's really so important. Be useful now. And I love the notion of now is a great time for brand building, and then start thinking about evolving your creative and your message to bring in elements of performance, knowing that every media dollar is going to count for even more once the spending starts coming back.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Matt.
All right, we've got questions coming in. So, and I've been sneaking a peek at these questions, Meryl. There's a common theme. They all have some version of tell us about a time when you've seen a ... So the first one comes from Eric, and Eric, thanks so much for this question. Meryl, what's an example of a brand that's done a good job of quickly turning around an overlay or end card change? And what are you seeing in terms of engagement or response with that creative?
End cards are kind of the neglected child in creative because there's such a small portion of an ad. Typically, it's about the last 5 seconds of a 30-second ad is when you see that end card. And for those who aren't familiar with the term end card, all it means is the card at the end of the spot. It's also arguably the most important part of your spot because it's the spot that tells your audience what it is you want them to do. So we're working with a number of clients that had spots in market right now, and they are either unrolling new promotions. So for example, apps that are free for 90 days due to the current environment that weren't free previously, or they have dedicated URLs where they'd like to send their audience. One in particular had a URL that now was a knowledge center and a resource center for their customers versus the previous URL, which was driving to somewhere else. So those little swaps, which basically are swaps in what action your audience is taking, are really important right now. If you have a timely promotion, if you have a new dedicated URL, this is the time to just quickly edit it into your current creative and get it back into market. And I mean, we've been going through this. I think this is the third week that we're working from home in this new reality. I'm also losing track of time, so it could be like the 7th week and I wouldn't know. So correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
But, performance-wise, anything that is more contextually relevant is going to perform better. So definitely performance, is going to be on the rise with these small tweaks.
Yeah, it's and my clock validates your clock. I think it's that this is the end of our third week. So and by the way, I would argue too, just as I mentioned in my upfront, that brands freeze, so too do consumers. When something like this happens, it's very natural for consumers to take a moment and pause and assess where they are and figure out what their new spending reality is going to be. And my sense is that over time, whatever the new norm is will emerge, and that will then start to give the brands who are changing the creative, whether it's an end card or something else, a better, clearer view of exactly what's the new performance norm while we navigate what's largely a sequestered work environment and living environment. Eric, thank you for that question. We got a question from Anonymous. Anonymous wants to know again in the spirit of have you seen dot 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 have you seen any COVID specific creatives in recent days that you thought worked well for the brand who created it?
It's a fine line because I've seen a lot of bad ones, and no, I won't name names on the bad ones. I think
Fair.
the one that has really resonated in market that I've seen a lot of positive response to is the Facebook ad that just rolled out. It struck a really beautiful tone. The voiceover was perfect, and it leveraged, stock footage and UGC, and it was a really emotional spot, and I thought it hit the nail on the head, given everything we're going through as consumers. And the other spot that comes to mind is Trade Coffee, which is a direct to consumer coffee delivery service, I believe. They put together this really fun spot that was entirely user generated content. And it's really fun, and it kind of celebrates the new normal of working from home. And I love that spot as well. And there's varying degrees between those two on how directly, they call out COVID. I don't think either of them actually say the word COVID, but they're hinting at it in a genuine way, and a genuine way for their brand. So that's why I think it works.
Those are good ones. I actually haven't seen the Facebook spot, but you've inspired me to go do that when we're done here.
Yeah.
I'll throw in, I really liked what Burger King has done, and they're emphasizing that A, they're still open for drive-through and possibly, I think, free delivery, but they show footage during the spot of their new hygiene practices, not only for food preparation, but also for payment. And so they show that they're reducing the contact needed for, if I'm not mistaken, the contact needed for payment to actually happen. So if you do go through the drive-through, it creates more of an assurance that your hygiene isn't at risk. And I just thought that's spot on because they're signaling to first of all, they're signaling, hey, we're still open for you. And look, in tough economic times, quick service restaurants become a go-to for families that are wanting a bit of a treat but can't afford even a more sort of mid-scale type of restaurant experience. And so I think they're not only selling but in a very soft way, but they're also reassuring their customers. And I really appreciated that work. Thank you for that question. We've got one more, and then we'll let you go, Meryl. This comes from Victor. Victor wants to know, have you seen examples of overly opportunistic creative? And you mentioned some bad ones that you don't want to name names. And so my sense is the answer to this question is that you have, but we may not be putting names up on the wall.
Yeah, I mean, you can just Google this, and there'll be so many examples. I certainly have seen my fair share, but I think it boils down to, and I'm not saying, I'm sure these spots were not created in a mean spirit. Everyone wants to be there for consumers right now. And don't forget, the people creating the creatives are also humans, and they're working from home, just like you and I. So I think it just misses the mark when it feels disingenuous. Remember, not every brand needs to comment about the pandemic. We don't need to hear a COVID commentary from, every single brand in the world. We have to make sure it feels really genuine when there is a tie there. So that's what I would say about that.
Well, look, Meryl, this has been so helpful. And it caps off a fantastic week of hearing from people who have a really strong perspective. And I put this right up at the very top of all of them because this gets to really where the rubber hits the road for so many brands. I mean, of course, here at Simul Media, we think an awful lot about media strategy, but we know that media strategy is only as good as the power of the creative behind it. And that creative challenge has gotten harder in this moment, but it's very evident that you're thinking this stuff through, and your advice today has been so valuable. So I really appreciate you joining. Meryl, I know you've told us this before, but if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do it?
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. Best way to get in touch with me personally is just at my email, which is Meryl, MERYL, at quirkcreative.com, or you can visit our website. It's findyourquirk.com. And Matt, thank you so much for having me. And I would actually just say creative is only as strong as the media plan, that it's working with. So I think the synergy of media and creative is really critical during this time. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I never tire of these conversations, so I'm confident we'll get you on a third time. Hopefully when things are a bit clearer and happier. Um, for all of the rest of you, I want to thank you for joining. Please tune in on Monday. This coming Monday, we are going to have Bill Harvey, who's a media planning veteran. For those of you who really study media planning, you may have almost certainly come across the name Erwin Efron. Well, if you know Erwin Efron, he's the sort of founding father of modern media planning. Bill Harvey was a peer of his, and so Bill is going to come on to talk about exactly what brands should be doing right now from a media strategy, not only for the moment but also to plan for the other side of the pandemic. And his experience, which has spanned all manner of different crises, is valuable now because he's developed a pattern recognition to help people really understand the things that link different crisis moments and the lessons that can be applied from one to the other. He's got so much wisdom, and I can't wait to hear what he has to say. So join us then. For the rest of you, I just send my deepest thanks for having you join us. And I wish you all a very relaxing weekend. I think we all deserve one of those. And can't wait to see you on the next Simul Media Live. So thanks again for joining, and take care, everybody. Bye-bye.